Benji, a shelter dog, had been returned 11 times with weak excuses from previous adopters. When Stacy, a new trainee, took him home, she discovered the shocking truth behind his repeated returns. Shaken by the experience, she drove back to the shelter with Benji, feeling guilty for having to return him for the 12th time. The shelter staff, eager for an honest answer, awaited her arrival, unprepared for the unsettling truth she was about to reveal. So why was Benji returned to the shelter 11 times? What was wrong with this poor dog, and could they fix it? But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. By this point, Benji had been at the animal shelter for 1.5 years. He was barely a puppy anymore, but he still very much looked like one, and everybody who came to the shelter to pick immediately fell in love with him and wanted to take him home. The truth is that Benji actually didn't spend that much time in the shelter. If he was present there, it would be at most 2 weeks before he was adopted by somebody. But the thing is that he just kept getting returned by the people who adopted him. This already started when he was brought into the shelter for the first time as only a 3-week-old puppy. His first owners had a dog who gave birth to 5 healthy puppies, but they inexplicably decided to keep 4 of them, and only Benji was handed over to the shelter without a word of explanation. Some eyebrows were raised at the shelter at the time, so they had Benji extensively checked by their on-call veterinarian. When all the test results showed that there was seemingly nothing wrong with the puppy, the shelter just concluded that he probably just got unlucky, ending up here. They put him up for adoption that same day, and the very next day, somebody had already come in to adopt him. It wasn't every day that a shelter would have puppies up for adoption, as mostly older dogs were brought in, so people who saw Benji knew this was a golden chance. The family he was going to seem to be absolutely perfect. A young married couple with a 5-year-old daughter dying to get a puppy. The mother also worked from home, so there would always be people around to give Benji attention. Nobody at the shelter expected to ever see Benji again. They had called 1 week after the adoption had taken place for a mandatory checkup, and by that point, everything still seemed to be perfectly fine with the puppy. The mother told the shelter that they were falling in love with the animal more and more every day. After this call, most of the shelter started to forget about Benji rather quickly. The dog had only been with them 1 day, and there were enough other animals here that needed their undivided attention. Benji should be set for the life they assumed. It only took 3 weeks before Benji was returned to the shelter by his new owners. The father had come alone with a happy and excited Benji following behind him. He had obviously bonded with the men and had no idea it would be the last time he would see him. The men only gave a vague reason for returning Benji. Something about that was just not working out, as it was constantly too much time. It didn't make any sense based on what the shelter knew about the family. The call from 2 weeks ago had sounded so incredibly positive. They reminded the father of that interaction, but he just raised an eyebrow, stating that he knew nothing of this call and that his wife shared his opinion about returning Benji very much. And sure enough, when one of the shelter personnel called the wife, they got a very similar response. Because the man had come alone, they suspected that he had maybe taken the puppy away against his family's wishes, but his wife seemed very much in favor. The shelter decided not to ask too many more questions at that time. If the family was unwilling to care for Benji, then the dog would be better off with them, and they were sure he would find a new owner who would absolutely love him in no time. The first day back in the shelter, Benji seemed to be very down. What of course made a lot of sense, since he had obviously bonded with the family, and now they had just abandoned him again. So the staff made an extra effort to comfort the puppy for the time he was with them. 2 days after Benji was returned, a young couple that had just started living together took notice of the adorable puppy and wanted to adopt him. The shelter was a little more skeptical this time and asked the couple a lot more questions to determine if they were a right fit for Benji. But all the signs pointed in the same direction again. There was not a single red flag to be discovered about the couple, and they seemed perfectly suited to adopt a puppy, or any kind of dog for that matter. And so the shelter made the adoption happen as soon as possible. They did make sure to do a lot more calls to the couple this time to get updates. This meant that this time they saw the return coming as again a first week over very positive messages. Things started to drop off quickly after that, as the couple seemed a lot less optimistic about their relationship with Benji. The last 2 times the shelter called, the couple did not even make the effort to answer them. They just showed up at the end of the day with Benji in their arms. It was not working out, and they figured it would be best if they returned the puppy to them. And once again, an honest reason could not be given by the now ex-owners. And every adoption that followed would prove that these were not incidents whatsoever. For some reason, it just kept happening. Every time Benji was adopted, he was eventually brought back to the shelter, and within 2 weeks, he was adopted again. The shelter had never seen anything like this before, and they just could not figure out why it was happening. The reasons for returning the poor puppy always seemed too shallow and weak, and they were also so different. At least some of them would have to be lies. Some said Benji had way too much energy, while others claimed he wouldn't even get out of his bed. Some said that he was aggressive to other dogs, while others said he was too scared of them to go to the park. The shelter was at a loss because what else could they do than put Benji up for adoption again? They could not just keep him at the shelter forever. This poor dog needed to find a forever home. But when he got returned for the 11th time, nobody had any hope left for that. They had even contacted other shelters at this point in the hopes that they could maybe find suitable owners for Benji. But every time they told the story that he had been returned 11 times already, shelters would back out immediately. It was also obvious that this constant, horrible cycle started to take its toll on the puppy that everybody at the shelter loved so much. They could just see the sparkle in his eyes shine a little less bright every time he was put back into that case. At this point, Benji was just sitting in the corner of his case, looking sad. His 11th owner finally gave the shelter a return reason that they actually believed. Benji just seemed not to trust him and just seemed unhappy overall. They would believe that all too well. They had also not told this last owner that Benji had already been returned 10 times, fearing it would turn him away. But they could no longer ignore the truth. Finding a home for Benji was becoming nearly impossible. Once a sought-after puppy, he was now just another scared, unwanted dog among many in the shelter. Then came Stacy, a trainee studying veterinary medicine who had been at the shelter for only 2 weeks. When Benji was returned for the 11th time, she saw him for the first time and immediately fell in love. Even after learning about his history, she wasn't deterred. Still living with her parents, she worried they wouldn't approve of adopting a dog. But to her surprise, they were already considering it. With the paperwork finalized, Stacy took Benji home that very day for the 12th time. But Benji seemed indifferent. He didn't resist, yet he also didn't react. Treats, pets, and toys did nothing to lift his spirits. On the ride home, he wouldn't even look at Stacy. He had no reason to believe this time would be different. When they arrived, her parents were ready to welcome him. Her father had already bought a new bed and bowl. Hopeful that Benji would finally feel at home, they were all excited to welcome their newest family member. Fortunately, the family already had plenty of dog supplies at home since Benji wasn't their first dog. In fact, 3 other dogs were already roaming around the house. Despite this, the other dogs were more than ready to welcome him in. It was a relief for Stacy and her parents that the introduction went so smoothly. Introducing a new dog could sometimes be a challenge. This was the first hurdle they had overcome, but as they would soon find out, it would be neither the last nor the biggest. From the beginning, the family noticed that Benji seemed hesitant to play or interact with the other dogs. He mostly stayed in one spot, observing his surroundings rather than engaging. It almost felt like he didn't want to be there, despite all the love and care they gave him. The other dogs, however, were much more eager to meet their new friend. They sniffed him excitedly, and one even brought Benji a toy. The attention and curiosity of his new companion seemed to chip away at his reserved nature. Wanting to make Benji feel at home, the family dedicated the rest of the day to him. They took him to the park, went to the pet store to pick out a new toy, and even cooked him a delicious steak. It was a perfect day in doggy heaven, and the transformation was undeniable. Benji spent the entire day wagging his tail. Stacy and her family couldn't help but feel overjoyed. Benji seemed to enjoy their company as much as they enjoyed his. Within just 24 hours, they had already seen glimpses of the enthusiastic puppy he had once been. It truly felt like they had found the perfect addition to their family. But then the question lingered. Why had Benji been returned so many times? Was there something they had yet to discover? Stacy wanted to believe everything would be fine, but she couldn't ignore what the shelter had told her. His past adoptions had all started the same way, smooth and joyful at first, only for things to take a turn for the worse. She knew that they still had a long road ahead before they could be certain that Benji was truly home for good. But as the days passed, it became harder and harder for the family not to get swept up in all the positive signs. Over the next few days, Benji seemed to settle in well with Stacy and her family, fitting seamlessly into their daily routine. Stacy kept the shelter updated, and they were pleased with his progress. However, one morning, everything changed. Benji was missing. The family searched the entire house but found no sign of him. Panic set in for Stacy, knowing the shelter had trusted her with Benji, and now he was gone. Determined to find him, Stacy took a week off work and began searching, asking neighbors if they had seen him, but no one had. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. As the days passed with no leads, she put up missing dog posters, hoping for a breakthrough. Meanwhile, she continued working at the shelter, forced to lie about Benji's whereabouts whenever asked. The guilt weighed heavily on her. 2 more days went by and still no sign of Benji. Stacy was running out of hope and knew she had no choice but to confess to the shelter. Just as she was about to make the call, her phone rang. A man claimed to have found Benji but refused to explain how or where. He insisted she come immediately if she wanted her dog back, even admitting he had considered taking Benji straight to the shelter instead. Stacy's heart pounded as she rushed to her car, setting off on the nearly hour-long drive to the man's house. How had Benji managed to get so far? What had happened to him? With each passing mile, her anxiety grew, fearing what she might find when she arrived. Stacy arrived at the man's house to find him standing at the door, arms crossed, visibly agitated. Inside, a sad-looking Benji was locked in a cage far too small for him. Stacy was furious. How could someone treat Benji like this? But then the man explained. Benji had shown up at his house earlier, and without seeing the posters, the man tried to find his owner. Assuming Benji was well-behaved, he let him roam the house until his cat appeared. In an instant, Benji attacked. The man barely managed to stop him in time, securing Benji in the cage for safety before calling the shelter. Checking her phone, Stacy saw multiple missed calls. There was no hiding this anymore. Apologizing, she took Benji back to the shelter, where she learned the truth. The staff had called Benji's previous owners, and every single one admitted they had returned him because he had attacked other animals. They had all lied, fearing Benji would be put down. But now, Stacy in the shelter finally had the missing piece of the puzzle: what had caused Benji's aggression. Benji's previous owners had loved him too much to admit the truth, but they returned him to prevent further incidents. Normally, a dog with his history would be labeled dangerous and put down, but Stacy and the shelter refused to let that happen. Now that they understood his behavior, they worked to help him. Benji stayed at the shelter for weeks, undergoing careful training to overcome his aggression toward cats. It was tough. He resisted at first, but with persistence, the shelter staff successfully coached the aggression out of him. Once he was ready, Benji returned to Stacy and her family, who welcomed him back with open arms. From that moment on, there were no more problems, just love, joy, and the home Benji had always deserved. No more shelters. Benji had finally found his forever family. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another unbelievable tale like this one.